Hey guys, welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and for the next hour, we're going to be talking about some serious stuff. Have you ever been scared to the core of your soul? If so, what's your story? Please remember to like, share, and give a subscribe. Years ago, when I still lived at my parents' house, I was sleeping on the couch in the unfinished basement with my girlfriend at the time. I woke up to her shaking me awake with absolute panic in her voice, whispering that there was a very tall man across the basement watching us. Hearing that made my blood run cold, so I slowly peeked over the back of the couch, and sure enough, I could just barely make out the shape of an extremely tall man facing us in the darkness. He was so tall that his head was close to the ceiling. I whispered to my girlfriend at the time that I was going to jump up and turn the light on, which had a string that you needed to pull to turn it on. And right when I did that, she needed to use the light to run to the stairs and get out of the basement. So after a second of psyching myself up for whatever came next, I counted to 3 and jumped off the couch and turned the light on. I finally got a proper look at the guy. It was my dad's effing scuba suit that he hung from the rafters to let it dry. My hands were shaking for half an hour after that, but we both got a good laugh out of it, eventually. Got into a head-on collision when a dude swerved into my lane. When I came to, I saw smoke coming from the engine, and my driver's side door was smashed in, so I couldn't open it. I was so scared I couldn't think straight to try another door, so I pulled myself out of the broken window of my driver's side door. Terrifying to think you're trapped in a burning car. I was 11, maybe 12 years old. Dad worked late most nights, so I was home alone per usual. Home, however, was a ranch house far out of town in a Florida pine forest. It was late and dark. The doors were all French-style glass with no blinds or curtains. Outside those glass doors was only a hauntingly dark tree line, dimly lit by the moon. Leaving all the lights on and TV gave some comfort, but this meant it was much easier to see than it was for me to see out. On this night, I had to get something out of the back room. This was our name for a garage that was absorbed into the house. The concrete floors and unfinished walls gave the room a cold air. As I'm searching for what I need, I glance up to see a large bleach-white figure standing outside the glass door, 6 feet tall with no head and no expression, just white hair draped in front like a ring girl. This was the night I learned there was another option besides fight or flight. It was freeze. I stood frozen in fear, as if the blood in my body just drained, unable to do anything until my brain recognized it was a horse's ass. The horse got out of its pen and was chilling under the carport with its ass against the glass door. When I was new to teaching high school, I was being observed by a principal. The class was being mostly good, but this one student was head down sleeping. I called his name, no response, so I went over to wake him up. I touched his arm and he just fell over. Yellow, foamy drool everywhere. He had overdosed. Thank God the principal I was there with was walkie-talkie to call for help while I did what first aid I knew. Student survived, but I was so scared because I wasn't sure how to help or if my helping was hurting. It's the feeling of being utterly powerless and incompetent when someone's life is in your hands. When I was a senior in high school, a girl in my neighborhood went missing and about a month later was found dead. During that time, her adoptive father was contacting people left and right. Apparently, he had his suspicions about my ex-boyfriend of 3 years who dated the missing girl in middle school. Adoptive father comes to my house to talk to me about ex and never really asked me anything about him, but he talked about himself the whole time and how he was in a white supremacy gang and kills 12 people a year, specific. After he left my house, he kept trying to get me to meet with him alone without my mom present to talk to me more about my ex because he felt like I was leaving stuff out in front of my mom. I told him no, I wasn't comfortable, and he just kept insisting. It got to the point where I had to have security walk me to and from my car at work and school. Adoptive father ends up getting arrested on unrelated charges, and the detectives come and talk to me to figure out what he said to me, etc. They told me to stay away from him and that he is dangerous. They pulled my mom away to speak privately to her, and I didn't find out till I was in college that they told her that they think he murdered the girl and that he was planning on murdering me and blaming it on my ex, that he went crazy and started murdering all his ex-girlfriends. It's been 7 years since this happened, and the adoptive father was just convicted of murdering his daughter in February. But I'm always terrified that one of his brothers are watching me since I testified against him.
I can only imagine the panic you felt when seeing your nephew like that, and then the relief when he snapped to and woke up. Innocent that it was, still pretty frightening.
Went into my then 2-year-old nephew's room to wake him up for the day. He was in his crib, laying in a kind of weird posture, with his eyes wide open, staring off at nothing. I figured he was awake already and thought, haha, he looks dead, to myself, and said, "Good morning, Matthew," and his eyes didn't move to look at me. I said, "Matthew?" and got closer to the crib, and the way he looked was worse close up, just unfocused, dead eyes, looking at nothing, body limp. I shook him gently, then harder, saying, "Matthew, Matthew, Matthew!" And when I yelled his name, his eyes suddenly focused, and he smiled at me and stretched like he often does when he first wakes up. Little Effer was asleep with his eyes open. It was only a few seconds, but I swear my blood turned to ice. Was never so scared in my goddamn life. No idea what caused it, and he never did it again. I was about to fall asleep in my bedroom. I was 16 at the time, so it's a while ago. Suddenly, my dad calls me, which is weird considering it was 2 a.m. and my dad never calls me because we're literally in the same house. My dad tells me to come downstairs because he doesn't feel very well, so I do. My dad is rarely sick, so I started worrying. When I came downstairs, he was drenched in sweat and held a hand clutching to his heart, making weird noises in pain. When I sat down beside him, he told me he called an ambulance. Then he went quiet, and around half a minute later he just said, "Can you hold my hand?" It terrified me because it felt like he was making sure to say goodbye in case he died. It took longer than it should have for the ambulance to arrive, and my dad's condition only got worse and worse. When they finally arrived, they were all very calm, but suddenly there was a change. They did an EKG on the spot, and suddenly started hurrying around with bags of liquid and needles and monitors around my living room, and they even told me to hold stuff and carry things for them. I tried to keep my composure, but I was shaking in terror. I overheard them saying that he was having a heart attack. They asked me to call my mom. I lived alone with my dad at the time, so I tried, but she didn't pick up. I told them she didn't pick up, and they basically said, "Okay, take care of yourself," and left with my dad. My dad was admitted to the hospital and ended up surviving the heart attack with minor complications, but I was left alone at home for 5 days straight. I was 16, for F's sake, and no one did the slightest effort to make sure that I was all right. I didn't sleep, I didn't eat, I just waited for my dad to come home. My dad is my best friend. He's the only one I have, and I catch myself going to check on him during the night just to make sure he's alive. I'm terrified every day. Sucked farther and farther out to sea on my bodyboard after sunset while surfing triple overhead waves just as the fog bank rolled in, obscuring the coastline and the direction I needed to swim to get home. Took a couple hours in near dark open ocean to land a couple miles up the coast, guided solely by the faint, faraway string of few streetlights and headlights that broke through the fog. Every splash I heard behind me was definitely a great white shark. I'd panic paddle whenever there was a big splash behind me. Again, I was in 20-foot seas. This happened constantly until I could regain my calm center and try to drop my heart rate, the whole while thinking about how all the fast paddling I did probably just attracted a shark. This was near San Francisco, lost at sea in great white breeding grounds while looking like a seal on a winter night in horrendous conditions. It's not easy landing on a tiny strip of beach when 12-foot waves are dumping onto dry sand and the current is ripping at a decent pace. 2 miles away, I landed safely, slept like a baby, waking up screaming every 2 hours. Met a bear cub walking through the forest. It was 10 feet away from me and was curious, so was walking towards me. Couldn't see its mom, just slowly backed away and kept walking backwards for probably half a mile. Long story short, I had a family member who suffered a psychotic break and threatened to kill certain family members and make others watch, as well as kill my mother, kidnap my sister and me, and raise us as his own. From the time that he was released from the mental hospital until the day that he died, I was terrified. Used my phone to watch behind me while I walked home from school and never answered the door while I was home alone.
That's a tough situation to be in, and you did what you thought was best for you and your mother and that's all he can do. I hope you're doing better.
When I saw my mom in the ICU, she was fine one day, went to the ER the next, had 3 surgeries, wound up being put on a ventilator twice, and developed a lethal infection that wasn't responding to treatment. She developed ARDS. Her heart was stopping every night. One time I was there and saw it happen, and that's when I started to really think that wasn't going to be a way out for her. I fought the staff pretty hard about this, but I realized she's basically being tortured at that point for nothing. They took her off the vent, gave her heavy doses of morphine to stop air hunger, and she died in front of me back in March. She was 60, so not particularly old. I turned 30 a couple of weeks afterwards. I miss her. We were very, very close and lived together, and now I'm pretty much alone in the world. She was a powerful woman, and I did not expect her to leave like that or so soon. But she had always told me, if I get so old I can't wipe my own ass, just throw me off a bridge. I also miss her sense of humor, so I hope that what transpired was more preferable than winding up permanently and severely disabled. If she could have survived all that damage, she would have absolutely and utterly hated that. When I was in 6th grade, we were in choir one day when out of nowhere an announcement comes over the loudspeaker. We're going into lockdown. This is not a drill. There's an active shooter in the building. We all panicked, switched out the lights, and packed ourselves into the furthest corner of the room away from the door, all 110 of us. Some people were crying, others were praying. My hands were shaking and I was just whispering, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." At some point, someone came by trying the door and pounding on it, and I had never felt terror like that before, and I haven't felt like that since. After the longest 5 minutes of my life, they got on the loudspeaker and said, "Thank you for your cooperation during the drill, students. You may resume class as normal." We went from utter terror to relief to rage in a matter of seconds. When I was 7-ish, a neighbor down the street suffered a mental breakdown. He threatened the neighbor next door, walked away, went into his own house, locked himself in, went to the arsenal none of the neighbors knew he had, and proceeded to open fire from his house for hours. My whole end of the street was in the firing zone. The cops backed a dump truck down our street with the bucket up to catch rounds as he was firing down the road. A bullet came through our kitchen wall, then went on through to the living room where it hit the table leg. Mom was in the kitchen. I was in the living room. She yelled for me to get down. I knelt in the hot bullet and burned myself, though I had been shot. We then had to hide in the back of the house until later that night. When it got dark enough, the cops led us out our side door and through the field behind the house that the shooter couldn't see. Got lost when I was out skiing and almost dove off a cliff. Wound up hanging on the edge of a tree branch off like a 100-foot drop. It was 25 years ago, and I can still feel that almost hollowed out feeling in my chest, almost like a vacuum. We were at the beach, and my son needed to use the washroom. I took him and my 2-year-old daughter into the washroom. My son went into the stall to do his thing. Because his swim trunks were wet, he had trouble pulling them up. I went into the stall to help him for literally 15 seconds, and when I came out, my daughter was gone. I ran out of the washroom, looked at the beach. She wasn't in sight. I started screaming her name and couldn't find her anywhere. Then someone said, "I think I saw her at the playground." I ran up a grassy hill and saw her on the slide. That minute she was missing was the scariest moment of my life.
It is surprisingly incredible how fast kids can be when you turn around for just a second. It's scary and real.
My ex-girlfriend had a psychotic breakdown, went from perfectly normal to insane within a week. One night I took her to the hospital during one of her episodes, and the doctor pumped her full of sedatives and said to bring her back in the morning as they had no beds. I didn't feel comfortable about leaving the hospital, but he assured me she'd be fine until the morning. When I woke up the following morning, I opened my eyes and saw she was lying on her pillow, staring at me wide-eyed and grinning. It scared the hell out of me. As we got up to get ready to go back to the hospital, she came at me with a knife and tried to stab me. I was able to get away from her and calm the situation long enough to call the police and paramedics. She later said that she had to kill me. I shudder to think what might have happened if I'd stayed sleeping for longer that morning. Cleaning out an abandoned meat-packing 2-story cellar that had been used as a brothel, me and my coworker were opening this steel door that was bolted shut. It apparently led to the old boiler room. When we peeled it open, the high-pitched, shrieking, screeching noise started coming towards us in the dark like someone was dragging a steel chair on concrete. My blood turned to absolute ice in my veins. I faced down guns before and had my share of awful experiences, but the terror that grabbed my brain was unreal. We both turned and bolted up the stairs so fast there was probably smoke coming off of our shoes. No idea what made the noise, but we didn't go back downstairs. I actually had this happen to me yesterday. I was driving home through the mountains and drove into a freak May snowstorm. I was on a road with a canyon on my right side, mountain on my left, and my wipers weren't doing a damn thing to help me with the snow. I couldn't see an effing thing. My heart was beating so hard and I wanted to stop, but there were cars behind me and I couldn't, so I had to keep just crawling forward. Finally got to a scenic overlook and was able to pull off. It was terrifying. It's a strange one because I had no actual logical reason to feel scared, yet I was terrified. I worked in a shop a few years ago and was tidying up at the front of the store near the windows at the entrance. I saw a man walk in, but I only saw his back when we came into the store. He had long hair and wore a leather jacket or leather trousers or maybe both, can't remember. I thought nothing of it at the time. A few minutes later, the same man was walking back towards the door and I looked at him casually. He was looking at me too, so we ended up making eye contact. Instant goosebumps, shivers. Whatever vibes he was giving off, it scared the shit out of me to the point that I couldn't move or even take my eyes off him. He slowly walked towards the doors while maintaining eye contact. When he walked past me, he had this mark on his face that was just purely evil. He proceeded to walk out of the store and turned right, and for a few moments he was covered by a huge sign in our window. Every cell in my body screamed at me to go, run. Even though he was actually leaving, clearly, I still felt the need to get as far away from him as possible. But at the same time, I felt like I didn't want to lose him out of my sight until I knew for sure he was gone. As he came back into view, he was still looking at me. When he finally walked past our window, I almost cried from relief that he was gone. He never said a word, never even approached me. All he did was look at me, and it scared me more than anyone ever. I never saw him again, and I hope I never will. Traveling cross-country with my infant when a teenager comes skyrocketing across all lanes of traffic. I start to quickly get over, but then notice a car already in the other lane, so I get back over. In my panic, I jerk the wheel too hard. Teenager misses me by a hair, but my car starts fishtailing. Everything packed in the car goes flying. Baby starts screaming, and I think we're going to crash into the bridge guardrail. Ended up on the shoulder eventually, and caught the whole thing on dash cam to show my husband later. My cousins have a huge backyard that is basically a forest, with a pond and dock included. As kids, that was where we would spend the summer, and me and a friend were big fans of climbing trees. One day, we reach our perch on our favorite climbing tree, and I tried to grab something out of my pocket. I shifted forward and lost my balance on the branch I was sitting on. I fell forward and 100% expected to fall at least a good 2 stories, getting smacked by branches the whole way down. I closed my eyes and simultaneously snapped my arm out and grabbed whatever I could. I ended up grabbing a fresh green twig sticking out of a branch, one of the kind that is so fresh you can't just snap it in half, you have to cut it or twirl it a bunch. Thank God I was so light at the time because the twig snapped and bent but didn't come loose. I dangled for a couple seconds, kind of in shock, before I found another branch to rest myself on. Scared the crap out of me. I didn't climb another tree for a couple of days before the memory faded, and I couldn't resist. I was running on a stadium-sized rink, ran a few miles, and was on my final set of stairs when I fell into the wall, feeling my body shut down one piece at a time. First my eyes went to tunnel vision, then blind, then I went slightly deaf and then fully deaf, and finally fell and blacked out. I had no idea what happened. As I woke up, I didn't remember where I was, who I was, or what was going on. Eventually, I stood up and realized where or who I was. Vomited everywhere when a kind janitor found me as I said, "I'm so sorry. Please let me clean that. It's disgusting." He wasn't having that answer, and he found me a paramedic who knew and called my parents. Went to the ER, they couldn't find anything wrong. 8 hours later, the same instance occurred, except this time I wasn't alone. My dad caught me before my head could be smashed on the coffee table. I found out that day that I was having seizures. I almost died twice that day. First, I narrowly missed falling completely down concrete stairs. The next, also narrowly missing a coffee table. Several months and 14 episodes later, I was diagnosed epileptic. I've had plenty instances since, but nothing compares to that day. I was 16 and confronted death by my previously healthy athletic body. Everything changed that day, including me. When I had a psychotic break and I left the hospital, I was afraid of effing everything. I couldn't leave the house without feeling like someone was about to murder or kidnap me. I've never experienced such fear and paranoia to that level before, which is saying a lot because I suffer from paranoid delusions. My friend and I were in high school at the time this occurred. We're both female. We decided to grab some pizza for her younger brother from the pizza shop a few minutes away. As we were walking back to her home, these two older men were standing around as we passed by. They decided to follow us, and one of them was saying the most disgusting shit and telling us what he wanted to do to us. The other was laughing along. We were both so scared. Thankfully, I saw another friend home approaching and run up to it. I rang the doorbell like crazy, and they both ran off laughing. It was so terrifying because we were so young, in shock, and so scared. When I got home, I felt so angry that I did not call the cops, and they did not face any consequences. I was at school when an announcement came up. The voice was very intimidating. It was a pre-recorded message that said, "Armed intruder on campus. Please take shelter and lock your doors immediately." There were like 34 of us in this class, and it was a science room. There weren't a lot of places to hide. We shuffle up to the side of the room. Several kids were praying. I was looking at my best friend. Our eyes were saying our last goodbyes. I was shaking uncontrollably, but also accepting my fate. Then an announcement came on. It was the principal. He goes, "I'm so sorry. I accidentally pressed the wrong button in a phone call that made that announcement. False alarm." Then the same thing happened a few months later. We were less scared the second time. When my daughter was 4, she was in an accident that broke both of her legs. A windstorm blew over a wobbly equipment shed at a sports arena that she was sitting next to avoid the rain. When the wind picked up, I was distracted by banners being ripped off fences when I heard the equipment shed fall over. I heard someone yell a kid was under, and I started panicking looking for her. It took 2 of us to lift the shed, and there she was. Her legs were absolutely effed, and it looked like she was bleeding from her mouth. Turned out to be candy. I've never felt that level of fear in my life. I panicked, and to this day, I wish I had held my composure. I'm so effing lucky that she's alright, for the most part, but that day is ingrained in my psyche as the scariest day of my life. The birth of my son. Wife started having contractions, but wanted to keep waiting because she is in the medical field and didn't want to be that woman that gets sent home for false labor pains. Gets to the point where you're supposed to go in, and she's still arguing with me. But then the pain gets so much, my wife, who has a very high pain tolerance, almost collapses. And now the contractions are starting to run into each other. I put my foot down and say, "We are going now." I grab the prepared bag, and my wife understands I'm not taking no for an answer. We drive to the hospital. The contractions went back to a normal pattern, and we're in the check-in. Everything is looking good, but the nurse notes the baby's heartbeat is a little low. We get checked into the room. After we're all in the room and things are progressing, the door bursts open, and about a dozen doctors and nurses fly into the room. Then my wife moved into different positions. As I notice, the lead doctor is worried about the baby's heartbeat. Lead doctor says, "We're going to the operating room now. Where's the father?" I pipe up that I'm the father. "Okay, come with us and keep up." The team then grabs the bed and runs to the OR with me trailing. As we're running, one of the medical people is telling me they're going to do a cesarean section, and once they get set up, they'll come and get me to scrub in. We get to the OR and have to wait outside, across the hall. Now begins the scariest half hour of my life. They don't come get me. Once in a while, I see people running in and out. My mind is racing. What if we lose the baby? What if I lose my wife? What if I lose them both? It was only a half an hour, but it was a brutal half hour. But the story has a happy ending. Eventually, they come out and tell me my son has been born, and he and my wife are doing good. They bring out my son, and I hold him in my hands for the first time, and I feel a joy I cannot describe. A couple of weeks later, in the follow-up appointment, my wife's doctor explains we very nearly lost the both. If I'd been 10 minutes later, things could have been bad, but we're all happy and healthy now. All is well that ends well, but that half hour was easily the scariest moments of my life.
I don't know if you heard my voice crack a little bit at the end of that one, but I had an almost exact same experience when my first was born, and this one really affected me. It was a cord wrap, and mom and son were okay, but that's frightening.
Was walking back from the store at night once and walked past someone. I was immediately hit with this intense fear that made my whole body weak and like my life was in danger. The weirdest thing was that I was walking with someone, and as soon as we got away from that person, they asked me if I felt what I just described. Super weird. Maybe I walked past a killer or something. I've been in different situations where fear and danger is more obvious, but none of them have come close to that experience with the stranger. I'm pretty sure these two old dudes were going to kidnap me once when I was 16. When I tell this story, people think I'm overreacting to some typical harmless creeps who weren't seriously going to do anything to me. But you would have just had to see their body language and hear the man's voice for yourself to get it. Like most women, I've heard my fair share of creepy comments from the usual men that catcall women in parking lots and stuff. This was very different. I was browsing CDs alone in a store. The CD section was completely empty aside from me. While I was looking, suddenly these two middle-aged men materialized out of nowhere. They had me cornered up, standing so close they were almost touching me. I looked up into the face of one of mine, my left, and he just had this completely blank face. With no inflection in his voice, he said, "Hey gorgeous, what are you doing tonight?" I remember being surprised by how normal he looked, because he looked like he could have been one of my friend's dads or someone my dad knows. Very typical looking man in his mid to late 50s with completely gray hair and glasses, and a buttoned up long sleeve shirt tucked into his jeans. He looked clean and well kept. But he was giving off major serial killer vibes. His cold, expressionless face, his monotone voice. I just knew he wanted to do some Ted Bundy stuff to me. I didn't look at his friend's face, but I remember that he had a huge beer gut. I didn't reply. I just quickly darted between him and his fat friend and ran away. One night, I was out on the back patio with my husband and I figured, nice night, I'm gonna hop into the hot tub. So I go inside and change into a bikini and come out. During that, he took off the cover and opened up the little gate that's there to block the dogs and our kids. At the time, it was just my daughter with us since son wasn't born yet, from getting near it and falling in. He went inside to change and I figured, shit, I forgot a towel. So without even thinking, I ran inside and got a towel and then stopped in the kitchen on the way out to grab a glass of wine. When I was pouring it, I heard my daughter scream. I put the bottle down and ran outside. She was trying to go up the steps to the hot tub, and one of the German shepherds we have, the girl Roxy, was grabbing her and pulling her back from the stairs. I ran over and scooped her up and held her in my arms until my husband came out. I've literally almost drowned in Howe Sound off the coast of BC before by running to jump off a boat into the water, slipping, banging my head, and tumbling into the water unconscious, and being woken up by my friend performing CPR on me. This was the scariest thing I've ever experienced. A momentary lapse of attention and judgment, and I felt like the biggest failure in the world, which was deserved. Never again though. Ever. I have a number of sleep disorders, but this one night really shook me to my core. I was sleeping on my side, facing the wall, when I suddenly woke and I had a feeling of complete terror and dread washing over me. I know it was just in my mind, but my brain was telling me something is standing behind me right next to my bed, and it's staring at me. I shut my eyes and just told myself that it was just a dream, and that it's going to be okay. I have no memory of anything after that. I just remember waking up the next morning and thinking back on what happened. Thinking about it doesn't scare me anymore, but I remember at that moment in time, I was absolutely scared for my life, and I thought I was going to die. Just a part of my sleep disorders, I guess. I went to go stargazing with a friend at a nearby field in Pennsylvania near Collegeville, around 95 to 97, 98. We were laying down in the tall grass and looking up at the stars, and we heard a rustle in the trees nearby. And then the noise of a gun poked out of the bushes maybe 15 feet away, pointed in our direction. It was a hunter who thought we were deer because he couldn't see us, but he heard and saw the movement of the grass. We knew if we moved, invisible as humans in the tall grass, we would be shot. We even saw a deer earlier, as he probably did. I felt pure terror in that moment, and without even realizing I was doing it, I found myself raising my hand slowly while singing, "You Are My Sunshine." I just wanted to be as not deer as possible. I kept singing until I was standing up, and the gun retreated, and I heard twigs snapping as the hunter walked away. I honestly don't remember what happened after that, adrenaline and all, but I assume we must have walked back soon after. I have no idea why that song came to mind, as I was on total autopilot survival mode. Probably the bravest thing I've ever done, and I'm glad it was just a hunter hoping to bag a deer. I'm glad I was able to convince him I was not a deer.
Well, that certainly is one way to see how you deal with a high-stress situation. There's fight, or flight, or sing. Nice.
I went into psychosis in the car on a family road trip. We had to stop at a stress center, mental hospital, halfway for me to be evaluated. Unfortunately, they had no beds, and it was Labor Day, so they couldn't admit me. But they sat me down with my parents and doctor. I remember hallucinating and seeing angels in the hallway and on the walls. I looked at a fire alarm box thing on the wall for 20 minutes, just trying to figure out if I was alive or if I was just imagining myself. My mother is not the best, so after all of this, she decided we still needed to go on that road trip. She sat in the back of the car with me while my dad drove, and I remember drinking a McDonald's smoothie, best damn smoothie may I add, and still feeling like I wasn't real. The whole trip I was completely out of it. I remember totally feeling like I was in outer space, like genuinely. I did not believe I was on Earth or human. I'm better now, but those were the scariest moments of my life. My 3-year-old being diagnosed with leukemia. She had been sick for months, and the doctors kept blaming it on reactions to getting some vaccines, then anemia, then a UTI, etc. My mom instinct one day told me if I didn't take her to the doctor again, she would die. She had labs drawn, and her hemoglobin was 2.3. That is almost no blood in your body. I knew something was way off for months, but knew it was cancer when her pediatrician's office called, and usually a nurse gives simple lab results over the phone, and it was a physician telling me she needed to go to the hospital immediately and to pack bags to be there for a while, and that she had a room in the ICU ready for her. The most devastating and terrifying day of my life by far. My ex-husband, her father, had just left for rehab the day before, and I received all of this info and had to process it super quickly on my own. I had to smile and comfort her while they poked and prodded her repeatedly, when all I wanted to do was break down. She went through chemo and all that comes along with it for 2.5 years, and she finished treatment on Halloween last year. I feel so blessed our story has a happy ending, and that she got to ring that bell, but that moment felt like I was living in an actual nightmare. I was so scared that I was numb. You truly never expect something like that to happen to your baby. It's amazing the cure rate for her type of leukemia. Pre-B cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia is now 97% curable. Prayers and good vibes to all of you who've shared experiences of trauma or terrible things that have happened. Yep, around the ages of 8 to 11, my mom had a stalker who lived in our neighborhood about 10 to 12 houses down, so not super close. He would circle our house with his car for hours on end. He'd drive by and take a right onto the main road, quickly turn around in the neighborhood next to us, drive by my house again, and turn around in my neighbor's roundabout driveway, literally for hours. It progressed over time to him coincidentally going on a bike ride at the same time with my mom was running, and coincidentally checking his mail every time my mom walked home from tennis. She saw him every day in every which form. We were about a week away from the situation hitting its peak when I was riding my electric scooter with my friends. As 10-year-olds, we didn't have a great sense of stranger danger, and she begged me to show her the stalker's house, so I thought, sure, why not? Well, he just so happened to be outside checking his mail, and my scooter just so happened to die right as we passed his house. I will never, ever forget the smile on his face, his incessant questions, and the feeling I had standing there as I tried to walk away as quick as I could. Unfortunately, I must assume this triggered him to take it to the next level, because the next week, he tried to legit kidnap my mom. I'll never forget the dread and immense fear I felt by simply being near that man. Ugh. When I was in middle school, I had a sleepover at one of my friend's houses. We had been friends since preschool, and I had slept over at his house countless times before. We'd usually just play Halo 2 or have a Nerf battle or whatever 13-year-olds do. On this particular night, we were downstairs in the basement, where we had the TV set up and a bunch of snacks and shit. When it got time to go to bed, we decided to just throw some blankets on the floor and crash down there for the night. We were positioned on the floor so that we were right in front of the staircase that led up to the ground floor of the house, with our feet facing towards the stairwell. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up in a sweat and couldn't fall back asleep. I laid there with my eyes closed, but something felt off. My fight or flight response were kicking in. At this point, I opened my eyes and looked around the room. It was very dark, but eventually I saw something that even today I still can't come to terms with. Standing a few steps up the stairwell, facing us was what I can only describe as a living shadow. It was completely still and wasn't being cast by anything. It was the shape of a person, maybe 8 feet tall, kind of fuzzy and barely visible. The fear, it didn't really hit me yet because I wasn't sure if what I was seeing was real. I started to calm down, thinking I must be seeing things. I decided to wake my friend who was laying next to me, and that's when I realized that he was already wide awake and was looking right at the shadow. I remember him saying, "What the F is that thing?" And hearing that sent me into a full panic mode. I've never been more terrified and confused in my life. We laid there in complete silence for a few minutes that seemed to last forever. And then the shadow just slowly moves up the stairs and disappears into darkness on the first floor. Maybe 10 minutes go by, and we hear the most horrible, high-pitched scream I've ever heard in my life. The dog starts going berserk and runs into the parents' room, and we both run upstairs. His mom was freaking the F out and screaming at the top of her lungs, while his dad was trying to calm her down and figure out what happened. She was absolutely petrified. I've never seen a grown woman so scared. She was bawling her eyes out, and when she saw my friend, she ran over and hugged him and wouldn't let go. None of us slept that night. I never did find out exactly what she saw that scared her so much, but maybe that's for the best. My friend and I never talked about it much. I stayed the night there many times since then, and nothing else happened. And he says they've never had anything remotely strange happen there before or since that incident. It was just completely out of the blue, and I don't know how to make sense of it. My bio mom has schizophrenia and is unmedicated. It wasn't a safe situation to grow up in, but no adults gave a damn enough to intervene until I was a teenager. It was usual for her to have conversations with herself and individuals that only existed in her mind. One day, when I was about 9 or 10, I was in the car with her, and she was having an argument with herself while on a multi-lane highway. She started accelerated and yelling, "I'll just kill myself, that'll show you." I tried asking her to slow down, but she didn't hear me in her state. She kept accelerating up over 100 miles per hour, and there's a curve in the road ahead. I start begging her to just hear me and to slow down. I thought for sure we were going to crash, and that would be the end of my short life. We get closer to the curve, and she doesn't slow down. We're just about to enter the curve, and time slows down, just like it does in movies before a big impact. She starts applying the brakes while in the curve, and the minivan skids across a couple lanes, fortunately missing any other cars. She regains control and then continues driving like normal. I say, "Mom, are you okay?" And she replies, "Of course. What are you talking about?" Like she had no memory of what happened 20 seconds before. She was in 2 accidents shortly after this incident, but I wasn't with her. Thankfully, neither at high speeds, and there was no serious injuries. I tried to take the bus or get a ride with a friend's parents as much as I could afterward, as I never trusted being in a vehicle with her again. When my youngest was just 4 months old, he was laying on the floor doing general baby stuff, flailing, gurgling, etc., when suddenly the noises stopped. I looked over, and he was still flailing, but clearly not breathing. I'd very recently gotten CPR certified, mainly in a bid to combat all the anxiety I was feeling postpartum. I'd honestly thought I was just checking boxes so I could remind myself I was prepared for emergencies rather than actually needing the preparation. But in what felt like an out-of-body experience, I scooped him up, went through the infant steps and dislodged a tiny, clear, which explained why I hadn't seen it on the carpet before putting him down, glow necklace connector that had apparently been in a party favor bag my older child had brought home the day before. He immediately started crying and was completely fine afterwards. I still feel like I'm going to be sick when I think about it. What if I hadn't noticed the sudden quiet? What if I had stepped into the kitchen for a minute? What if I hadn't been able to dislodge it? Used to be a pothead. Sometimes when I smoke, I would get lightheaded and pass out for a bit. I'd always come to and realize what happened, thought it was the spliffs, and it happened randomly throughout my life. Went to a show and did mushrooms. Things were going fantastic. Smoked maybe a quarter of a joint and got crazy anxiety. Had to sit down outside. Next thing that happened, I'm woken up with a bunch of EMTs trying to sit me in a chair, asking me what I took. I told them what I took. I was disoriented, didn't realize what was happening. Girlfriend told me I passed out for a few minutes and she didn't know what to do. I had no recollection of this until the second she said it. It was like Inception. I had no idea what was happening until that moment. I kind of discovered what a dementia or memory loss patient must go through. We decided to leave, and I went through the whole process a second time on the drive home. I broke into cold sweats, vision tunneled, thought I was going to die, so I just tried to see if I was happy before I died. Literally accepted death. And then a few minutes later, I woke up again drenched in sweat. Scared the F out of me. I don't smoke weed anymore. I need to see a doctor and see what's what. That was 6 months ago though. The most likely thing I found online is low blood pressure, but I really need to see someone. Go.
Thank you for sharing your story. Now go to the doctor. Don't wait. Don't write about it more. Go.
My ex would get really drunk and be really mean and verbally abusive. On 2 occasions after dinner, I found myself in the passenger seat of his car asking for my grandpa, who's long passed, to please protect me from him. He drove like an enraged, drunken idiot to scare me. I don't really believe in God or all that, but I was so scared and felt I had nothing else to turn to. The ironic part is that on the occasion, I also asked my grandpa to please show me a sign, and as we drove, we pulled behind a semi-truck with the words, "Love is an action, not a word," scribbled in the dusty back door. I'm away from him now. He's finally stopped drinking and has apologized in his own way for how he behaved. I worry for his new girl though still. Oh well. There's 2. At my best friend's house, shortly after she had her first kiddo, we were hanging out in her room. I left to go to the bathroom and saw a dark shadow move across the hallway from the living room to my niece's room. My best friend was in her room behind me, so I knew it wasn't her. I grabbed the first thing I could find, which was a cup or a vase, and screamed my best friend's name that there was someone in her kid's room. By the time I got there, not even 5 seconds, my niece was awake and alone, but her bedroom window was wide open. Cops searched the house, never found the person, was probably a robber, but still. Second was when my partner and I were driving to dinner, pulled off the highway and saw 5 cars pulled to the side of the off-ramp. We stopped because I saw someone waving their arms, and then I noticed the car down the embankment. A couple dudes were looking through the passenger window. There was smoking coming from under the hood, and there was a woman absolutely screaming bloody murder. She's burning, oh my god, she's gonna burn to death." Turned out, there was still someone trapped in the front seat, and no one was able to get her door open. Between me, my partner, and another man, we got her back window broken, but by the time I climbed into the back seat and they got the passenger door open, there was fire pouring through her dashboard and up along her windshield coming through the floor, and her foot had gone through the floor and was stuck at an angle that made it impossible to pull her free. So I had to lean into the front seat to grab her leg and maneuver her foot free while we were seconds away from the car going up in flames and killing us all. We managed. The sole of her foot and my hands got pretty badly burned, and her leg was broken severely. But we got her out and over the road to the other side of the embankment. We had barely cleared the asphalt when the car exploded. I'm born and raised in South Florida. No mountains, not even really hills. My husband and I bought an RV and took a trip to the top of Georgia to an RV park at the peak of the mountains. We started going up the actual side of the mountain, and it felt and looked like we were going to almost straight up. I started feeling panicky. The road was ridiculously narrow, especially in our massive bus-like RV, so when I looked out the window I could see all the way down the mountain and zero road between it and me. I had a full-blown panic attack, started bawling. Nothing we could do but keep going forward. And for some reason, they don't believe in guardrails up there. I actually thought that's how I was going to die, tumbling down some mountain in a huge tin can. My dog was sleeping between us on a dog bed, and I felt terrible that she was going to die with us. I wanted my mom. I'm not a dramatic person in general. I'm also not one to cry or get panicked about things, but I was sure I was dying right then. Made it to the top. Still couldn't open my eyes until we actually pulled into our spot 20 minutes later. Had an absolute blast going over bridges and hiking to waterfalls, even sitting on the edges of the mountains. But the entire time I felt panicky about having to go back down the mountain. Left at 4 a.m. so I didn't have to look, but come on, Georgia, invest in some guardrails. I was a lifeguard at a small water park and had been working there for about 2 years and never found the job scary or anything of the sort. I had jumped in the pool many times to help kids that couldn't swim, and it was never scary to me. I had the situation under control and knew that everything was fine. I just had to jump in to save them. That was until one day on my first rotation of a shift, I was watching my water, and all of a sudden, I see this kid face down in the pool, and normally I'll just whistle at them and watch and they'll jump up out of the water, but this kid wasn't moving at all, and he wasn't responding to a whistle from me, and another kid in the pool even tapped him on the shoulder, and he still didn't move. Immediately, I did 2 long whistles, meaning someone is either unconscious in your pool or needs serious medical attention. This has only happened once while I was working, but I wasn't the one that did it, and jumped in the water right then and there is when the kid jumped up out of the water. I had legitimately thought a kid was possibly dead in my pool. I've never been so scared in my entire life. I didn't go back on duty at all that night and was shaking for the next 4 hours out of fear. I guess that was still there. It turns out the kid had special needs, and it almost felt like I could be angry about it, but I still am. I never watched water again after that day and quit a week later. I couldn't do it anymore. Anytime I started, I would just get so scared, and that's a feeling that still sticks with me 4 years after the fact. I was home alone when there was a knock on my front door, a man I've never seen before. I peeked through the blind and shook my head no and pointed to go away. He drove off a few minutes later. I'm standing in my kitchen when I see the car back in my driveway again, and I see him walking around to my backyard. I immediately go upstairs and try to get a better view of where he is and what he's doing. I went to go downstairs to grab a knife when I hear my front door open and he's inside. I locked myself in my mom's bathroom, frantic, tried to open the window to jump out, but the window got stuck. For a good 5 minutes, I genuinely thought I was going to get murdered. I'll never forget the feeling. Turned out to be a new renovation man who was sent over for the first time that day and had a key. I've never actually recounted this story or written it down because, well, it was the worst experience of my life. I was on a field trip for my high school choir. My friend and I were exiting an amusement park that was run really poorly. It was very difficult to remain hydrated as you weren't allowed to bring your own water bottle unless it was sealed, and the lines for every food service were insufferably long. So we were all pretty dehydrated while exiting, but one of us was worse than the others. While walking from the entrance to the parking lot, she asked us if anyone else felt like the world was vibrating, like it was moving up and down. Right then I should have stopped, as that is not something normal to say. I hadn't really known her that long and had really only gotten to know that group throughout the day. Her friends have said that she just gets dizzy sometimes, therefore it was okay for me not to react. But I know that was not a justified excuse, as I didn't know that she sometimes just talked like that. I should have stopped. Well, we kept walking, and she brought it up again. The world is moving up and down. Does anyone else feel that? In my head again I'm thinking, oh, she's just dehydrated. Once she sits down and gets some water, she'll be fine. But I remember looking to my left and seeing one of her eyes roll back and beginning to think that it was not normal. I definitely should have stopped there, but we were like 20 yards from the buses, so I thought we could just keep going and it'd be fine. But she starts slowing down, and I end up a bit ahead of the group. 2 of my friends are kind of holding her on either side, and someone else then looks past me and says, "Is she okay?" I turn around and my 2 friends and an older woman are holding her from either side, and she began collapsing. She had a complete seizure at this point. It looked like she was trying to breathe but couldn't. Both of her eyes had completely rolled back and her mouth was gaping open, appearing as though she was trying to get air. At this point, my friends holding her obviously started crying as they lay her down gently, and the older woman takes charge. The bus driver comes outside with the first aid kit from the bus, and the woman states that she doesn't know if it's an inhaler, EpiPen, or whatever that my friend needed. At this point, she's still on the ground, completely unresponsive, and her body was convulsing violently. I can still vividly see every muscle in her body tensed up and just convulsing. And then the woman said, "I don't know what will work, just try it." And at that point, I actually started thinking, oh shit, she's actually gonna die. The adult who was with us didn't know what to do. She didn't know what would help. Once I realized no one actually had control of the situation, I panicked. We don't know if it's a seizure or a stroke or whatever. We don't know if she can actually be saved. So the older woman eventually starts screaming for some kind of sugar, candy, soda, something to try to re-energize her body. Someone brings a bag of candy, but she quickly dismisses it as she doesn't know if my friend can swallow, which she probably couldn't. At this point, I run into the bus, which was only about 20 feet away, screaming for soda or sugary drinks if anyone had them, and I ended up staying on the bus because they wanted to keep people away from the incident. I didn't actually see this, but evidently, they were able to use sugar supplements that were in the first aid kit to stabilize her. At this point, she was still unconscious but breathing normally. According to my friends who stayed down there, she woke up after a few minutes and they asked her how she felt. And obviously being herself, her first response was, not very good. They were able to lay her down on the curb for a while until the ambulance showed up, giving her water and trying to keep her from moving. Once the paramedics arrived, they were able to take her to the hospital without much trouble, and she ended up being just fine. Evidently, what had happened was that her body was overheating, so it intentionally induced a seizure to keep her from getting heat stroke. She had almost no potassium left in her system afterward, and she had apparently come frighteningly close to dying. However, I didn't see any of the stabilization. The last thing I saw before I ran onto the bus for sugar was her, completely unconscious and every muscle thrashing violently. She was being held by the older woman. My two friends who were there were distraught. One was sat down a few feet away with her head in her hands, bawling. The other was standing a bit further, crying. I never saw her recover, just go down in my mind. And that image, I'll never forget it. It made me realize that the thing that scares me the most is not my own death, but the death of someone I care about. Seeing that heartbreaking expression on my friend's face made me feel something I had never before. It all culminated in real, true fear. And I ruminated about it for a while. I kept replaying the entire event, second for second, in my head. I had 3 opportunities to stop, and I didn't. Once she started seizing, I didn't act for what felt like an eternity, though it was like only 30 seconds. I've considered that if she had died, it would have been my fault. And I know that's obviously an irrational thought that doesn't make sense, but I still haven't been able to forgive myself for it. I ended up hanging out with this group more and talking to one of them for a long time about how guilty I felt, and she helped me work through it. That experience was so terrifying and painful, but it all ended up being okay in the end. And I've gotten so close to those people I was with, it's kind of funny, because earlier that day I had said that nothing brings people together like experiencing something shitty together, since the park sucked. And it ended up being really accurate. In the end, I'm just glad that she survived and ended up being fine, because that was what mattered. TLDR, watched as a friend almost died. When I was 14 and went into labor at 27 weeks gestation with no prenatal care or really anything to prepare me for what I was going through, at one point I was begging God to make the pain stop, even if that meant dying, lol. I'm not even religious. Then to see my lifeless baby carried away while they took me into the hospital, I had him in an ambulance, to finish delivery and get me to stop bleeding. Editing to add, it was strange how quickly the pain was gone. He was born and the pain stopped. They asked me if I was in pain and I said, no pain, I just want my legs to stop shaking. And then they gave me morphine, lol. We both ended up being fine. He's 7 now. When my mom called me in the middle of the night telling me to get to her house that the police were there and something happened to my twin sister, my initial thought was that she got arrested or something. I lived down the street from my mom at the time, and the feeling of absolute terror diving there was something I cannot explain. I kept saying, she's dead, I can feel it. It's a mix of absolute panic, shock, and dread that I cannot put into words. I arrived at my mom's house and saw a cop car with just their lights flashing and heard my mom scream from inside. I was right. That night replays in my head often, and I can still feel that horrible feeling. Trigger warning, CSA. When I was 13, my second stepfather was murdered. He got my adoptive mom and me out of a bad situation when my first stepfather had been raping me and I suspect hitting my mom. None of the adults in my life knew, but it was still the situation where I felt like he rescued us. Found out later, mom had cheated on the first stepdad with the second, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, 6 months after he was murdered, mom peaced out. She wasn't guilty of his murder or anything, she was just a flake. Couldn't be without a man. So she did what she does and she went to New York to be with a man, telling me she was leaving for a job but she'd be back to get me. Yeah, right. Anyways, I loved my stepdad and was really bummed he was gone. 2 years after he died, my dad asked me if I wanted to go to his grave. I said yes. It was a weekday in January and a good hour's drive away. So by the time we got there after he finished work, it was really dark. He asked me if I wanted him to come with me and I said no, I could handle it. The graveyard he's buried in is small, and I remember exactly where he was. So I slowly made my way over to his grave, sat some flowers and a little card down, and talked to him a little. And when I started talking, I started weeping hard. I was so upset he was gone, and the chain of events that happened afterwards. I lost my mom, I lost my cat, and my whole life was just upended. I was weeping so hard my whole body was shaking. I was cold and upset, and it was rough. And then I felt my dad's arms around me from behind. It was a great feeling of being comforted and warmed. I was happy he didn't listen to me. He never said anything, just continued to hold me while I cried. After what seemed like forever, I said something like, "I'm okay, give me just a few minutes." Wordlessly, he let go and I finished up my talk with a headstone. I made my way back to the warm car where my dad was listening to some music and fiddling with his BlackBerry. I thanked him, and he said, "For what?" And I replied something like, "Thanks for knowing I needed comforting, and coming out there and hugging me. Top 10 best hugs I've ever had. Top 10 best is one of our little inside jokes." I was looking him right in the face as Dad looked at me back and I watched his face fall. He told me he didn't come out there and hug me. He had a call from a client and had been in the car the whole time. I felt my heart fall through my butthole. I literally started gagging. Someone or something held me as I cried, and I don't know if it's worse that it was a stranger or a ghost, but I was not okay. Then my dad informed me he was just joking, and he was sorry, and please don't throw up in his car, asshole. Funny now though. Snowpocalypse last year. I'm from Texas, and have lived here my entire life. I've seen snow maybe 10 times. My power kept going out, but I wasn't too worried. It would be off for 5 minutes, then back on for an hour, but by that afternoon it turned off completely. My mom had been offering to come get me and my cats all morning, but I didn't want any of us driving after I read about all the wrecks that had already happened. But once I'd been without power for a few hours and started shivering, I realized I couldn't stay. I spent the next hour so scared for her driving, but also for us if she couldn't get to my side of town. Luckily, we made it back home safely, and I will always be so incredibly grateful because my apartment lost power and water for 5 days. I had a full-blown panic attack once we made it there safely. People made fun of us for not being able to handle a little snow, but it was terrifying. Our houses are built to keep the heat out, so it very quickly dropped to freezing inside for a lot of people. We had 6 adults and 10 pets staying with my folks by the second day because they're on the same grid as the hospital. We lost water but had prepared for that. So many people died just trying to keep warm any way that they could. It happened just a couple hours ago. For context, I'm a girl and I live in a big city. I often wear a skirt, but not a revealing one. Its length is about my knee. I live near the train station. It's about a 30-minute walk. So I was walking home from the train station, focused on my phone in said skirt. I was chatting with a friend and my mind was completely focusing on her. It was getting dark and my traveling bags were really heavy, so I tried to walk a bit faster so I would be home sooner. As I walked past the nightclub, I put my phone away for a minute, then I saw him. A man was standing creepily leaning against his car and waving at me. I looked behind my back in case he didn't mean it for me, but you know I did that awkward waving back when you're not sure? He smiled way too much and got into his car. I was confused by this interaction. I pulled up my phone to distract my thoughts, but as I was talking to my friend, I had a weird feeling. The man in his car started to follow me slowly. My legs began to shake a little. I had nothing on me to defend myself. I started my mobile tracking for my friend in Messenger. As I arrived to a pedestrian crossing, I wasn't sure I should step on the road or not. I did it. The car behind me sped up and stopped on the crossing mark so close to me I was about to cry. The man grinned, honked, and waved again. I couldn't run, but I tried going as fast as I could. I pulled up my phone and took pictures of his license plate number. There were some people on the road, but mostly men, and I was scared. He pulled down many times near me and honked, waved, and grinned. Other cars on the road were confused, honked at him. He was preventing them from normal traveling. I saw an old lady and I ran up to her and started talking about what's going on. She was really nice. She hugged me as if she were my relative. I was comforted, but the man didn't stop. Pulled up again and again, waved, grinned, and honked. The lady suggested we should drink a coffee, and we went to a bar near there. I didn't see the man for about an hour. Later, as I finally arrived home, after I thanked the lady for her kindness, I was still shaken up by the event a little. It's no big deal, I get it, but I felt useless, weak. I was scared he'd run me over or kidnap me, and I can't feel safe since then. I saw his car parking not too far from here. I'm thinking about going to the police station. Yeah. I had one moment a year back. I was coming back from work late at night. I walked the steps, then got to my door and realized I left my keys inside. So I started calling my friend inside to open the door, but there was no answer. So I sat outside the house for 30 minutes until the time neared 1 a.m. I go on the road to get some distance to throw a rock at the window, and all of a sudden a feeling of dread came over me. Without even thinking, I turned my head to look down the street, and all I see is this huge haze and distortion in the street, sort of like when it's hot outside and there's distortion in the distant air, but only it was more localized in one area of the middle of the street. I don't know why I didn't run when I should have, but anyway, a big man wearing a hoodie comes walking up the block along with haze disappearing behind him as he gets closer. He walks behind me, passing me by, and my instincts started screaming, "Look behind you." I turned my head and he says, "Yo, why you looking over here?" Then I said, "You're walking close behind me. I don't want any trouble." Then he literally just repeats what he said, but this time he starts coming towards to saying it over and over again repeatedly. Now I'm no stranger, squaring up randomly on the street, and have laid out a couple of bigger folks in my past, but something was different about this guy, and my gut just kept screaming run and hide. Fear took over, and I ran shamefully and hid. He chased me around the house, but he couldn't find me and left. My friend finally came out, and I told him what went on. The freaky part was I asked the owners of the house to replay the footage that night to identify the guy, and they told me they couldn't find anything on the camera.